Welcome to today's webinar focused on the latest updates related to PHADA and NSPIRE. Before we begin, we'd like to take a moment and review the logistics of today's event. All attendees are muted and will not be on camera. We will be taking questions throughout the panel discussion. At any time during the webcast, please use the Q&A link in the toolbar to submit your questions. And we ask that you use that and not the chat feature, as we are not monitoring that for questions. We are recording the webinar and we'll make it available on PHADA's website following today's presentation. And as a reminder, the discussions in this webcast are not for media use. For quotes and more information, please contact PHADA directly. And now I would like to turn it over to PHADA's Executive Director, Tim Kaiser, who will present the agenda.
Good day, and thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about two very important regulations, NSPIRE and the Build America, Buy America regulation that HUD is working on, otherwise known as PHADA. And PHADA in particular is not that well known to many agencies, so we thought it important to do this update. We will reference quite a bit of material on the PHADA website that you'll want to access, and it's all available, and there will be QR codes that you can link to in this webinar. Certainly, we'll be discussing these issues and doing trainings at our conferences, and we'll be covering the topics in our newsletter. And we'll certainly stay very focused on these two very important issues. So joining me today will be David Weber and Ryan Trout of our staff. I would like to begin just by focusing on NSPIRE. As you see, it stands for the National Standards for the Physical Inspections of Real Estate. The objective behind NSPIRE makes a lot of sense. The department has noted that it wants to focus on the health and safety of public and assisted housing residents. That, of course, is something that PHADA and its membership totally supports. NSPIRE is needed, improvements are needed in the physical inspection system because the system known as UPCS is more than 20 years old. And the focus of NSPIRE is mostly on the units where the residents live, which again makes sense. And the department hopes to provide for more accurate scoring in the physical inspection system. We share that hope, but as you'll hear, of course, we have a number of concerns about that. One of the things that I don't think is widely known is that ultimately NSPIRE will apply to most, if not all, of HUD's programs. It applies to RAD agencies under the project-based Section 8 program, public housing, and ultimately will apply to the Housing Choice Voucher program. And we'll discuss that a little bit. There will also be a resident participation and feedback component to the scoring, which up to this point is not known. That's one of the reasons why PHADA has a number of concerns about NSPIRE, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are the QR codes that I mentioned where you could access some of the materials, certainly PHADA's most recent letter, which I'll discuss in a second, and our official comments on the rule. With physical inspections, the devil is always in the details. There can, as we've seen over the decades, there can always be a lot of subjectivity in a physical inspection system. And unintended consequences, of course. This is among one of many reasons why PHADA is calling for HUD to defer the April 1st implementation date of NSPIRE. As it stands right now, HUD does plan to implement official scoring as of April 1, which PHADA thinks is is misguided and really problematic. That is what led the PHADA board just a few weeks ago when they were here in Washington to call on HUD in this September 22nd letter to defer NSPIRE. And I'd like to just talk for a couple of minutes about the concerns stated in that letter. First, we need more details from the department. They've been putting out information in a piecemeal manner. We need the scoring, how the scoring system will work. We need to know the standards. We have a number of questions, which I'll cover in a minute. So the most important thing is we need all the information at one time to make a judgment about whether this program can be effective. It's essential that we get this right. I mentioned a few minutes ago that ultimately NSPIRE will apply to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. There's already concern that landlords and owners are dropping out of the voucher program for a myriad of reasons. We are concerned that if NSPIRE is perceived to be inaccurate, defective, or otherwise problematic, we could potentially lose even more owners. And certainly HUD doesn't have that goal in mind, nor does the industry, but that could be an unintended consequence. So we need more time to make sure we get this right. That's why we call for, in the PHADA letter, a period of advisory scoring. We need at least a year of advisory scores to make sure the system is accurate and fair to housing authorities. So that's another thing that we want to see included in the program. We have a variety of concerns about potential increased costs under this program. As one example, agencies are going to be responsible for the provision of even more smoke alarms, which we support. Clearly, the health and safety of residents is at the top of everyone's priority list. But where is the funding going to come from for that initiative? Is the department going to request the funding in its budget? Will Congress appropriate the fund? And the smoke alarms is just one example of many potential increased costs. There are several others that we can get into. Another longstanding PHADA concern, which we feel has never really been addressed, is the issue of tenant-caused damage. We outline our concerns about this both in our comments and in our letter. Many times over the decades, agencies have been effectively penalized for issues that they have no control over, that they don't know about, because they're not reported by the residents. So we feel that those should be factored into the scoring system, which, by the way, David Weber of our staff will discuss in just a moment. So as I said in the letter, the PHADA board unanimously took the position that this program needs to be deferred. As it stands now, HUD plans to implement official scoring next April, which is only 6 months away. The department is not ready. Agencies are not ready. Residents are not ready. We need more information. So it's really important that we get this right, and that agencies not be penalized under a scoring system for things that may be beyond their control. There's a variety of HUD capacity questions and concerns that PHADA has. We're not trying to be overly critical of the department, but they, in our view, are not ready to implement this. They need to devote more time and resources and staffing to this to make sure it's done right. And of course, I don't have to tell you out there running PHAs how important the IT and software aspect of this is. we're concerned that there may be issues with HUD's capacity on the IT side to handle this program. So in sum, April 1 should be a no-go. We will keep pushing that issue. I do want to point out to members that to HUD's credit, they will be doing field office road shows to talk to you about NSPIRE, to help you get ready. We will work with HUD on those field office meetings to make sure you're aware of them. They're going to be very important. But again, those have not yet been announced, and they're going to take some time. So again, this should be deferred. Now I'm going to call on David Weber just to briefly outline some of the issues with scoring and go into a little bit more detail with some of our issues on that. And then we can take some questions after David's short comment. David?
All right, thanks, Tim, and hello, everyone. HUD has not shared any real details of the scoring at this time. What they've given us is sort of a framework and what they anticipate. They do expect it will still be a defect point system where certain items, depending on their severity and their location, will cause a deduction in points that's similar to the current UPCS method. They do claim that they will include some variations to how they score that based on the size and type of the property, so that will not, be one size for all sizes of properties. And they do expect initially to continue to have a 100-point system, in part so they can have some comparison to the previous UPCS scoring. They've really highlighted that the deficits, the point reductions will vary. They're high. There's 3 location categories that they're looking at. One would be outside, which would be the least important. Then they have inside, which would be middle, and then they have the unit itself, which would be the most important location factor. And then the severity: is it a life-threatening? Is it a serious, or is it a routine? And they'll, that's sort of their matrix. But we haven't gotten any details yet about how that's going to work. They have indicated they will continue to not score based on smoke detectors, although it still will be a life-threatening 24-hour correction. They are going to try to reduce inspector subjectivity, especially around tenant-caused damages or tenant blocking and egress. And they also have indicated they're refining their egress standard, because we've had some confusion about, what does that mean in different types of buildings. So that's, the demonstrations that we've heard from people who have been participating in the demonstration is they've not gotten any feedback about scoring anything beyond the life-threatening items. We really need that feedback loop to happen, so we can make sure that these scores are reasonable and are based on things the housing authority can control, or the landlord can control. They are expecting to at least initially have a pass-fail for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and they actually are currently looking for agency volunteers, particularly those who may have project-based voucher units, to participate in a NSPIRE voucher demonstration. So that's, will hopefully give us an opportunity to give more feedback, and we'll, if they're just looking for volunteers now, hopefully that indicates a longer time frame for implementing for the HCV program. But the regular NSPIRE is, they are still on track to try to roll this out with scoring and the whole bit by April 1st for public housing, for multifamily, as they try to have one inspection standard across all the HUD programs as part of their goal.
Yeah. I mentioned, David, I briefly mentioned the resident participation aspect. You and I took part in a recent meeting with REACT staff I think it was last week. And we were asking REACT staff about, well, what do you have in mind? Because this would be a new component. There used to be a resident participation survey as part of PHADA scoring, but that was eliminated. The only information that I recall at this point is there's two possibilities. One would be some kind of a survey, again, of residents about the physical quality of their units. And the other, there was an indication that residents could request inspection of certain units, but that would then affect the random sample. So I wouldn't think you could score that. We brought that up with the REACT staff. But this is, again, one of the reasons why we feel the implementation date needs to be changed, because at this stage, HUD really doesn't have any answers about that resident participation aspect.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that they definitely don't have a good idea about how to do this, although apparently Congress has directed them to improve the resident input in this process.
Right.
So they're actually open to suggestion on how we might incorporate some type of resident feedback into this inspection loop. But as those who may recall the old tenant survey, you know, it really was not, often did not produce representative results, and thus was taken out of the FAS scoring. So we're concerned about that. I don't know, Tim, if you want me to mention a few of the other specific standards we're concerned about, or
well, I have them in front of
development.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, so one of there were a couple things in addition to additional smoke detector locations. There, of course, is the CO2, the carbon monoxide detectors, and locations and operation of those. They've also put in something around water quality, which we have really pushed back hard on, since, you know, like any other property owner, yeah, the pipe from the main to the building is usually the owner's responsibility, but the water that's coming into that pipe is not, it's not something that HUD is really responsible for. The jurisdiction for water is the EPA, and it's generally handled by state and local authorities who are in many cases trying to address this across their municipalities. And so there shouldn't be this added requirement on public housing authorities to monitor something that they really can't control. That was another one. And of course, the costs associated with all of that. And there are a few others that we've pushed on. As I mentioned, the egress standard. There's still a graffiti standard based on the, the UPCS was really focused on curb appeal kinds of issues. And, and getting away from that, what real impact does a graffiti have on a tenant's health and safety? That should be, if it's included at all, it should be a relatively minor item in our view. So there's a lot of issues around those things. Agencies should be able to prioritize that if they feel it's necessary, but it shouldn't be imposed through an
I mentioned the road shows that REACT is planning to do in the field in the coming weeks. PHA should expect to hear about those soon, we're told by REACT. I think we'll have a chance at those meetings to really get more, or at least request more information about the scoring and the criteria. And I hope there'll be a good back and forth between the department staff and housing authority representatives. So again, I encourage you out there to attend those if you're able with your staffs. Certainly at PHADA's meetings, we've been covering NSPIRE in detail. We will have more sessions on the new inspection system at our January meeting in Orlando. Blake, do we have?
I was just going to say two more quick comments, which is They are aiming for the method to be much more transparent and simple than UPCS, and to really reduce the amount of subjectivity that inspectors will have. They're really aiming to make it much more clear cut about what is a defect. The location is key, and that's about it.
Well, on the subjectivity issue, I think we've had numerous conversations with REAC about that over the years, and it's a very difficult thing to eliminate or even limit the subjectivity on the part of inspectors. Blake, do we have any questions? We could take those now and certainly move on to Baba.
We do. So we have a question that's just come in asking, do you know if the date of the April 1st date is just for public housing? And what about HCV within the PHA inspection still using HQS?
So yes, the April 1 date is for public housing. The plan is to go to the voucher scoring later on in 2023 or 2024. But public housing will be the first with the official scoring. And again, we're calling on that to be deferred.
Right. And I believe that multifamily is on the same timeline. Is that right, Tim? Or if anyone else, I believe that any properties that had previously been subject to UPCS will be subject to NSPIRE as of that April 1st date. That's the department's goal.
Okay. It looks like we may have another question here. Does the new NSPIRE inspection require a smoke detector in each bedroom?
That is one of the concerns that we commented on, and you'll want to look at the PHADA comment letter, which again is linked to that QR code. It's on our website. I briefly mentioned that. There would be, as I understand it, a requirement for smoke detectors in every sleeping area. And clearly, we understand the rationale for that. And I think many agencies will strive to do that if they don't already. But the concern is cost. The capital fund is already underfunded as it is, and we're concerned and therefore calling on HUD to request the funding for this and Congress to appropriate the money. And it's not just the smoke alarms, as David mentioned, it's carbon monoxide detectors. Water quality is going to be measured using these new standards. That implies certain additional costs that will need to be covered. So we understand the objective, but we're concerned about the cost implications.
We have 3 more questions here. The first is there anything regarding cleanliness? Who would be responsible for cleanup?
David, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I don't recall seeing anything particular in that, unless it was something that created a mold or infestation risk.
Yeah.
And I think it would be on the housing authority or the tenant to figure out how that cleanup would occur.
I would mention, yes, infestation is one of the health and safety major components that's included in the scoring criteria. But of course, infestation could be resident caused. So that's something there really needs to be discussion about.
Another question is, will the scoring be based on AMPs or actual sites?
So what the new scoring is really going to focus mainly on units. That is the objective here. So you will get a rolled up score, but heavy emphasis on units with lesser emphasis on things like the site, common area.
Right, but I do think it still will be based on AMP, just because that's how HUD has all their data organized.
Next question, will CO detectors be required if all utilities are electric?
So I'm trying to recall, I think that's a question we posed in our comments. Certainly, they shouldn't. But that I think is still an open question, but one where you would think the answer would be obvious.
Next question, REACT states that smoke detectors and smoke alarms are not scored. However, we receive point deductions for the EHS in this area. Has this been addressed?
Again, that is, we're getting a comment from Dennis DeBello, who's an expert on the scoring and the physical inspection, and he said on carbon monoxide detectors, no. Blake, the answer to your question, though, is that it hasn't been addressed yet because they've not yet divulged the full scoring criteria. I think we'll take one more question and then we'll move on.
I do want to mention it was mentioned in the chat that HUD has told some that the multifamily date is going to be October rather than April for multifamily, PBRA properties. Certainly HUD is very aggressive in their timeline, so all those dates could change, but we will see.
We have some additional questions, but we can continue those at the end if we need to move on.
Yeah, and we will try to address the questions in the coming days as well, and certainly in the PHADA Advocate newsletter articles that we do in the future on this. I just want to, close out the NSPIRE discussion by saying this is something we're obviously paying very close attention to. We'll get you information as we receive it. Do plan to go to the field office meetings if you're able to. And we will be pushing this position of PHADA's to defer the implementation date. And I would encourage members to share our correspondence with your own representatives and your 2 senators. So then the other issue is, again, one that's really important and is not as well known because it's fairly new, and that is the Build America, Buy America initiative, BABA. This stems from the enactment of a 2021 law, the infrastructure law, and we're fortunate to have Ryan Trout, who's going to give us a briefing on that and point out some of PHADA's concern. So Ryan, I turn to you.
Great, thanks, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Ryan Trout. I'm a senior policy analyst with PHADA, and I'll be discussing the Build America, Buy America Act, also known as BABA. So I'm hoping that by the end of this, you'll be able to walk away with some answers to the following questions. First, what is this? What is BABA? Why is PHADA concerned about it? Are there any waivers? And what comes next? Next slide, please. So first, what is BABA? We'll go to the next slide. And BABA, or the Build America, Buy America Act, was enacted as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act on November 15th, 2021. And it establishes a domestic content procurement preference for all federal financial assistance obligated for infrastructure projects after May 14th, 2022. BABA applies, I want to kind of emphasize this, to all federally funded infrastructure. It's not just HUD or housing, but effectively, this requirement mandates that federal agencies must carefully review the particulars of a proposed project funded by federal financial assistance to ensure that any required iron, steel, manufactured products, and/or construction materials were produced domestically. This necessitates the creation of internal HUD processes and federal processes through the Made in America office at OMB to properly vet each funded project, as well as external recipient-facing processes that will allow recipients of these funds to properly understand, comply with, and report on their obligations. Federal agencies are starting up processes to implement and track these requirements to ensure that federally funded infrastructure projects are carried out using American-made goods. Advancing these objectives, though, will require a long-term dedicated approach. And as PHADA has expressed and HUD has agreed, there are existing gaps in the US manufacturing base and a lack of product sourcing information that will not be filled overnight. Without a strong US manufacturing base and clearly defined product sourcing, housing authorities are unable and ill-equipped to navigate the burdens of BABA or that BABA places on federally funded infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. So as I've already alluded, PHADA has some concerns with BABA and its potential impacts on housing authorities. In the next few slides, I'll detail some of our concerns. Go ahead to the next slide. So I want to begin by saying that PHADA supports the laudable goals of BABA and recognizes the long-term benefits of establishing and supporting American industries. However, PHADA has asked the department to consider the following, which I'll cover in the next slides, when seeking to implement BABA's requirements. Next slide. So our concerns include a lack of a mature manufacturing and sourcing marketplace, which could further exacerbate supply chain issues, leading to project delays and cost inflation. There's also a lack of a compliance structure for construction materials and manufactured products, and limited details on the reporting and regulatory requirements associated with BABA. There's the potential to undermine existing administration goals related to increasing the housing supply or expanding broadband internet services to underserved and unserved communities, which itself is also in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So here we have two competing things within the same act. There's an undefined waiver process, which is lacking details about broad exceptions for housing authorities when faced with these underdeveloped marketplaces, which again lack sourcing information for building materials. There is a possibility that any de minimis threshold could be set at a level which causes undue burden to housing authorities when performing maintenance or program operations or development projects. There could be a significant inflationary effect on the already large capital backlog, which leaves housing authorities with deteriorating units and families living in poor living conditions. PHADA believes that this could lead to project delays and increased costs, which could lead to longer turnover times and vacant units. It could lead to lower occupancy rates and undercut the department's strategic goal to serve more families in the public housing program. And there's a short implementation timeline and the lack of department research into the potential impacts of BABA regulations could be calamitous for housing authorities and the families that you all serve. Next slide, please. So with all of these concerns and kind of a lack of this foundation of a mature marketplace and sourcing information, you might be asking yourself, well, hopefully there's going to be waivers. What about some waivers? So next slide. And BABA does provide a waiver process. So considering the shortcomings in BABA, agencies may waive the domestic content procurement preference if 1, a waiver is in the public interest, 2, the types of iron, steel, manufactured products, or construction materials are not produced in the United States in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or of satisfactory quality. And 3, the application of the domestic content preference would increase the cost of the overall project by more than 25%. Additionally, next slide. BABA authorizes two distinct types of waivers. There's a specific waiver requests, which are tailored to individual projects and are typically the kind that will be submitted by the financial assistance recipients. And then the second are the general applicability waivers, which affect whole cloth programs or agencies as a class. So per the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, any proposed waivers will be required to be submitted for public comment for a period of at least 15 days. So if it's a special waiver request that you are seeking on a particular project, that would go to HUD, but HUD alone cannot approve these waivers. They will then also go through the Made in America office at OMB, and they will be posted for at least 15 days for comment. And I will go through soon a process that another department is going to be using just to help provide some kind of further information about what other departments are doing and what HUD may follow. Additionally, these waivers must be narrowly tailored to achieve the specific needs of the project or projects without diluting the overall goals of BABA. The waivers represent a practical tool to ensure federally funded projects can proceed as normal without disruptions to timeline or budget. As PHADA understands, the waivers, the waivers are kind of a short-term fix, right? Because policymakers hope that any waivers will send market signals to American firms, allowing them to respond to the gaps identified by the waivers, eventually removing the need for the waivers. So say you couldn't find enough of a particular product domestically made, you were able to get a granted waiver for that to buy it internationally, that the hope is then that sends a market signal to domestic manufacturers to say, hey, this product isn't being made here, but people are looking to buy it. They're having to find other ways of sourcing it internationally. And the hope is that that will then allow an American company to start making that, manufacturing that domestically, then removing the need for that waiver. But it is important to note that the department is statutorily required to implement BABA and the waiver process as defined in the IIJA. PHADA recognizes the potential for delays due to that 15-day publication requirement for any waivers. And as such, PHADA is pushing for broad waivers and maximum flexibility to help housing authorities continue to focus on mission-critical efforts to house families in need while meeting the statutory requirements of BABA. So the HUD waiver then, HUD has published a 6-month waiver of BABA that waived the general applicability of BABA to provide HUD with additional time to solicit and evaluate BABA's potential impact. And this is what PHADA has commented on, and we'll have a link to the comments either in the chat, I believe it in the chat. So the waiver is effective for 6 months after that May 14th, 2022 deadline. But that means that that waiver expires on November 14th, which is just over a month from today. Next slide, please. So but HUD is currently watching some proposed waivers that the EPA has put out. And so the EPA has proposed 2 different waivers. First, you have the de minimis general applicability waiver, which states that products that qualify for a de minimis waiver cumulatively may comprise no more than a total of 5% of the total cost of materials used and incorporated into a project. The EPA's rationale is that infrastructure programs vary widely from small community projects costing thousands of dollars up to large billion-dollar regional infrastructure projects. So based on an assessment of agency infrastructure projects, some larger projects have such significant material costs that a dollar cap would negate the intent of the de minimis waiver. As such, the EPA did not include a dollar cap for its waiver. PHADA believes that in addition to to similar consideration, HUD should also consider the geographic variability of construction costs and material availability when determining its own de minimis threshold. The EPA also has the small project general applicability waiver, which will cover EPA projects with a total federal funding, direct EPA funding, and any other federal agency in amounts equal to or less than the simplified acquisition threshold, currently set at $250,000. At our recent legislative forum, PHADA members expressed concern that this threshold is too low, specifically in relation to gap financing for development projects, as if you trip that small project general applicability waiver, the federal dollars then infect your entire project. So if you had $300,000 in gap financing on a $25 million LIHTC project, the entire project would be required to meet BABA requirements. The department believes that if the EPA waivers are approved, these waivers could set a precedent and that other agencies, including HUD, will then follow the EPA's example. Next slide, please. So, sorry about that. Here we go. The Department of the Interior has developed a waiver process. And so, many federal agencies are working on BABA and related waivers and waiver processes. So while HUD has been watching the EPA waivers, the Department of the Interior has created a waiver process for project recipients. First, recipients are asked to check their website, their general applicability waivers, to determine if a project or materials meet the criteria of one of these already approved interior-wide waivers. If the criteria are met, a separate waiver would not be required. However, if a recipient's project or materials do not meet the general applicability waiver criteria, the recipient may submit a waiver request to the department. The Interior asks that the waiver request justification include a detailed justification for the use of goods, products, or materials mined, produced, or manufactured outside the US, and a certification that the non-federal entity made a good faith effort to solicit bids for domestic products supported by terms included in requests for proposals, contracts, and non-proprietary communications with potential suppliers. I think that's really important, that if HUD were to follow something similar, then housing authorities would need to have make a good faith effort in their bid solicitation process and keep track of that. If the Interior determines that a waiver request, in whole or in part, appears to meet the legal and policy criteria of BABA, then Interior will post the proposed waiver justification for public comment for a period of not less than 15 days to their public comment page, and then will post approved waivers on their Approved by America request page, and the recipients will be notified of that request if that request was approved. Next slide. So by now, I'm hoping you know a little bit about BABA, some of PHADA's concerns, and the waiver process. But with HUD's 6-month waiver deadline fast approaching, what's next? Next slide. So according to HUD, things are, quote, percolating behind the scenes. In the next few weeks, we can anticipate 3 documents to be released. They are expecting to release an implementation guidance, a notice about HUD's waiver process, and this notice will be asking for comment on the process with a focus of those comments on the need for waivers and the potential burden of the information they will require in a waiver request. So thinking about that Department of the Interior process, and then also a potential broad scope waiver. HUD also reminded PHADA and other industry groups that BABA does not go into effect until November 14th. And so it doesn't apply to any funds dispersed prior to then. And that because of the continuing resolution and a lack of a full budget, there's a good chance that housing authorities will not be impacted by BABA and its requirements until January of 2023. Next slide. So for next steps, we're going to continue communicating regularly with HUD officials about member preferences related to waivers and the implementation of BABA. Once these things are released, I'm sure we will be reaching out to collect feedback from members to be able to provide comment to HUD. And we will continue to advocate to the department for workable solutions and keep members up to date with BABA related news. So at this time, I'll throw it back to Tim or Blake to open the Q&A.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, thank you, Ryan. I wanted to mention and reiterate that last point, and thank you for your great work on this. You mentioned in your discussion that this is a regulation stemming from the Infrastructure Act of late 2021, and it applies to a lot of federal programs involving maintenance, construction. I know you've talked with others in the housing industry that are equally as concerned. I just want to point out this is something we're working with other industry partners on. You've talked to groups like the home builders who also have serious concerns. Do you want to add anything about the similar concerns we're hearing from other federally funded entities?
Yeah, so particularly on the comments for BABA, the National Association of Home Builders, who also then sat on a panel about BABA at our legislative forum, they expressed a number of concerns very similar to ours related to BABA, particularly around supply chain issues, that there's just a limited number of U.S. manufacturers that produce home building materials. And so if everybody is trying to use those few folks, we're going to overwhelm those systems and we're not going to have enough. The long timelines that this could potentially cause, and because it could cause an inflationary effect on the cost of goods at a time when not just at housing authorities, but nationally, there's an affordable housing crisis, that if it costs more to produce the homes, then rents and home prices are going to continue to go up. So they expressed some of those. Another one was a joint letter from a number of like telecommunications and internet service providers looking to be exempt from BABA because of very similar effects on the broadband rollout.
Right.
And so while we have $65 billion for broadband rollout, to work on getting to underserved and unserved communities like those living in public housing or in rural communities, that if this has an inflationary effect on that $65 billion, it goes, it might not go as far. I think it might make it more difficult to get to all the communities that they're hoping to get to.
Yeah, and another objective of the recent so-called Inflation Reduction Act is to get Americans to invest in green energy. And one of the provisions is you'll get significant rebates for buying, electric vehicles. But the electric vehicles with American parts may not be available. So, that was just another example. You pointed out one or two of conflicts within the law itself. So a lot of work for not just HUD to resolve, but other federal agencies. You pointed out EPA, Interior, they're all struggling with this.
Yeah, my hope, and we won't know until these documents are released here in the next few weeks. My hope is that HUD, OMB, and really the rest of the federal government will be maybe a little looser, a little more flexible with their waivers and the waiver requests in the first few years. And then if what they're hoping happens and there are market signals and there's more American manufacturers producing things, that then it will reduce the need for those over time. But that this really is going to take time to implement, that it isn't something we can just turn on, in the next month or even in the next 2 to 3 years, that it really will take time.
So Blake, I think we have some questions. Did you want to read those for Ryan?
Sure. So we had two that had come in prior that are kind of similar, that deal with provisions for products that are, have zero manufacturing, processes in the US, and in particular, how that might affect scoring for PHAs if there are delays in getting materials.
So right now, because HUD hasn't released their process, we're not 100% sure. I would think that if it follows something similar to interiors, that an agency will need to make a request for a waiver. It will then, if it's because there's not enough of that product or it's going to increase timelines, it will then have to be published for 15 days. And then if approved, then you'll be able to go about your normal business. There is the potential also that depending on where HUD sets that de minimis threshold, that everyday products or one-off things are going to fall well below that $250,000 threshold, or if it's higher, as we're hoping it will be, that then this won't impact those kind of day-to-day things.
Another question on BABA is about funding streams. What funding streams would BABA apply to? CFP, public housing operating funds, et cetera.
Let me see. Let me come back to that one. I don't have that list in front of me, but our understanding is from HUD is that it's almost everything, but it's not everything. So if I can find that list.
I'm pretty sure, Ryan, that it does apply to the capital fund and the operating fund, definitely the capital fund and maintenance efforts. I saw another question in there about supplies, and David, well, I'll get to you in a second, David, but my understanding on supplies like stoves, refrigerators, it does apply to those types of things, correct?
So I guess it would, it's no, so it's not things within a unit that can be like the tables and chairs don't count, right? The scaffolding doesn't count because it'll be removed afterwards. But it's the things that are in place. So appliances, I don't quite know, right? Because
we'll check on that.
Yeah.
We'll check and get an answer to that question. David?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the applicability is more about if it's federally sourced funding, it's more about the use of the funds. And so if you're using it for, a capital cost, a construction cost of materials, then it's going to apply. I think the question of whether it would apply to appliances will likely be sort of moot because the de minimis, the threshold will be much higher than the cost of even some number of appliances.
We have another question here. Asking for more clarity on this. Is BABA replacing the Buy America Act? And is there an approved country list like the BAA?
So BABA is, I guess, kind of the law of the land at this point. There is not an approved countries list, but it does provide a carve out for existing international agreements, but that the requirements can't run afoul of existing international trade agreements. Yeah.
Go ahead, Blake.
I was going to say we have another question that's kind of related to appliances. Again, does BABA only apply to capital level projects or consumable maintenance and administrative supplies? So what they are asking specifically is like, do I need to worry about adhering to BABA when it comes to replacing the stoves and fridges on 1 or 2 at a time basis? You know, what's the applicable level of BABA?
So I think what how David had answered the previous one about it will really depend on where HUD sets their de minimis threshold level and on their implementation guidance. I think that will tell us a lot more here in the coming weeks.
Also on for next question, when it says any disbursement after November 14th, does that mean if a PHA makes a CFP grant draw after that date, does that qualify as a disbursement?
So I don't believe so. If HUD has already dispersed it to the housing authority, then I believe that the way, and Tim, please correct me if I'm wrong, but on that call, the way it sounded was for HUD dollars dispersed after November 14th, which is why there's that impact of the CR and kind of future fiscal year funds. But I believe anything that's already been dispersed to housing authorities is not affected by this.
I think you're correct about that. I saw a question regarding OMB's role. You referenced the Office of Management and Budget, and the reason they have such a big role in this process is it is, as I pointed out, federal government wide. It applies to virtually every agency. There's a question about how's it going to be enforced. Is OMB overseeing it? Certainly, they're heavily involved in the waiver process, and agencies have to adhere to the OMB dictates regarding waivers within certain parameters. But that's, I think, to some extent, Ryan, I mean, HUD's hands are tied, right, by that factor.
Yes, yeah, and there's, I mean, this is, I think it's indicative of there's a new office in OMB called the Made in America office that agencies are working with with their waiver processes and coming up with these things. But when it comes to the enforceability, it's a great question. We aren't really sure either. We don't know what this is going to look like. We don't know if it's going to be a review or like an audit process after the fact. But I think one of our members said it best. Are they going to tear open your walls in a project to see the wiring or the studs that you use to build your project? Like we don't anticipate that, but I think it's really going to be more of a due diligence, making sure that in your bidding process, in your sourcing efforts, that you are making that good faith effort to source things domestically before you go outside. I'm curious then to see in their guidance how HUD defines that, right? How they define that good faith effort, and that'll be something that we're kind of waiting to see.
Blake, I saw there were a couple of NSPIRE questions, which I will try to answer in a moment. Do we have other questions regarding BABA?
We have a couple of other BABA questions that I think are very similarly related to what's considered a manufactured product and appliances, and also like cost of materials. So, from different regions, how is that affected? It's like a door purchased in Alabama versus one in Florida.
So for something like let me see here. I'm thinking about the way EPA is doing their de minimis, where it's like a percentage of the overall project. So like a doors as a percentage of a project in Alabama versus doors as a percentage of a project somewhere else, and kind of the cumulative cost then of those BABA items. I think that those would be the key things to look at, as well as then any type of small project waivers or thresholds that are set by the department.
So I think these questions illustrate concerns that agencies will have about BABA and that we have about BABA. There are many questions that have yet to be posed, let alone answered. I just want to assure our members that these are things we will remain focused on and alert members to as soon as we get the information. I do want to go back to NSPIRE. We'll go just a few minutes over our 2 p.m. Eastern time. It won't take much longer. But there was a good question about NSPIRE appeals and how that process will work. And that's a very good question. HUD at this point for the new NSPIRE program hasn't really articulated how that's going to work. It's another one of the reasons why PHADA is suggesting and advocating to the department that they defer the implementation date, because they need to outline how that appeals process will work. And then there is a very good comment in the Q&A section about tenant caused damages and how PHAs get penalized for things that they do not have any control over and that they may not even know about. And I want to assure viewers, our members, that these are points that we are going to continue to bring up to the department when we have discussions about scoring. PHADA strongly believes that tenant caused damages should be, this should not be factored into a scoring system, and certainly PHA should not be penalized for these kinds of things when they may not have control over them. So I want to thank our members for participating. I will turn it back to you, Blake.
Thanks. So this does conclude PHADA's webinar on NSPIRE and BABA. We'd like to thank all of you for attending today and remind everyone that a recording of this webinar will be available on PHADA's website in the very near future. And we'd like to invite everyone to please take a short survey that we've prepared. It's accessible via the QR code on screen here. We appreciate your participation and feedback in this survey to help us make these as informative and as useful for you as we can. So we would, again, thank you very much for attending today. Please take the survey now and have a great rest of your day. And also, we would like to remind everyone that registration is now open for the 2023 Commissioners Conference in Orlando, Florida. The early bird pricing ends December 9th, so we encourage you to register as soon as possible to take advantage of the preferred rates. More information is available on PHADA's website at www.phada.org/cc23. Thank you very much.